All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always up for a good deep dive.
Awesome. So today we're looking at some recent U.S. immigration news. You sent over some articles, some updates, and I even saw some personal notes scribbled in there.
Yeah.
Seems like this is something you've been following pretty closely.
Oh, absolutely. It's been pretty hard to ignore, honestly, with everything going on.
And you know what really jumped out at me?
What's that?
It's how this goes way beyond just the usual visas and green card stuff. There's this whole constitutional angle that I bet most people wouldn't even think about.
It's true. It's kind of a hidden layer to all this.
So whether you're someone directly affected by these changes or just trying to keep up with what's going on, we're going to break it all down, get to those key takeaways, and what they could actually mean for you. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan.
Oh.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so the thing that keeps popping up is this emphasis on the 10th Amendment.
Right.
Help me out here, remind me what that's all about again.
Well, basically, it limits the power of the federal government when it comes to immigration, which means more control goes to the individual states.
Okay, so this is where things get interesting. We're talking about states potentially having totally different approaches to immigration.
Exactly. And it's not just theoretical anymore. We're actually seeing a bunch of governors getting ready to push back against any federal changes they think could be bad for immigrants living in their states.
Okay, hold on. So we could be looking at a situation where it's like different rules and different starts.
Yeah, that's the potential here.
I mean, wouldn't that be kind of chaotic? What happens to someone, let's say they live in a state with a governor who's really, outspoken about immigration one way or the other?
That's the big question, right? Like, how does this all actually play out on the ground? Because the source even mentions governors taking steps to, actually block what they see as federal overreach on immigration.
So it's like a tug of war almost.
Yeah, exactly. And that tug of war could end up creating this patchwork of policies across the whole country, which, that could have some pretty big effects on where people decide to live, even on the economy.
Wow, I hadn't even thought about that. Okay, so this brings to mind the Ninth Circuit Court, which the source mentions a few times. It covers a pretty huge chunk of the U.S., right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And importantly, that includes states with some of the largest immigrant populations.
So does this mean the Ninth Circuit is going to be like the deciding factor in all of this?
Their rule's definitely going to be significant, no doubt. Historically, they've often sided with states' rights, especially when it comes to protecting immigrants.
Okay, so they could be a bit of a roadblock for the federal government if they try to push through something those states don't like.
Yeah, you could think of them like a circuit breaker.
A circuit breaker.
Yeah, like if there's a sudden surge of power from the federal level that could be harmful, they can step in and stop it.
That's a good analogy. So if you're worried about some big policy shift coming down, knowing which court has jurisdiction in your area could be, surprisingly important.
Absolutely. It's a detail a lot of people overlook.
So we've got the big picture stuff, the 10th Amendment, this potential showdown with the Ninth Circuit. But what about the everyday person? The source recommends renewing those employment authorization documents, the EADs, like ASAP. Why the rush?
Well, in new administration, it often means changes to immigration policies. And getting that EAD extended now can give some peace of mind. It's usually harder for the government to revoke once it's already issued.
Right, so it's kind of like get it while you can.
Yeah, exactly. Better safe than sorry.
I know from personal experience how stressful that whole renewal process can be. I had a friend last year who went through an absolute EAD nightmare, just constant worry about deadlines, losing their job. It was rough. It really showed how crucial those documents are.
Oh, for sure. They're lifelines for a lot of folks.
But it's not just about working, right? I noticed the source also mentions looking into advance parole, especially for anyone thinking about traveling outside the U.S.
Yep, good catch. That's another thing to consider, especially with all this uncertainty around potential policy changes.
So remind me, what is advance parole again?
Basically, it's like getting pre-approval to re-enter the U.S., which, in this climate, that could be super valuable.
Even if you're not planning a trip right this second, could it be worth having, just in case?
I think it's definitely something to consider, just to have that extra layer of security.
So we've got the big picture stuff, but are there other practical steps people can be taking right now?
Oh, absolutely. There's this small but really helpful change to green card renewals that's worth mentioning.
Oh, tell me about it.
So the updated form now gives you a 36-month extension instead of the old 24 months.
Whoa, that's a big difference.
It is, and it'll save a lot of people time and hassle fewer trips to those field offices. It
Yeah.
really streamlines the whole process.
Yeah, that's great news for anyone who's in the middle of that renewal process. Okay, so beyond these practical steps, anything else standing out from what you've been reading?
Well, there are a couple of specific updates that deserve a closer look.
Lay it on me.
The source talks about Lebanon getting temporary protected status, that's TPS, and also about the H2B visa program being expanded.
Right, those caught my eye too. Let's start with Lebanon. What does it even mean to get TPS?
Okay, so TPS is basically a form of temporary relief. It's granted to people who can't go back to their home country safely because of, maybe there's a war going on, a natural disaster, something like that.
Right, and in Lebanon's case, things are pretty rough right now.
Yeah, it's really dangerous for a lot of people to return. So this TPS designation lets them stay in the U.S. legally, work, gives them a bit of a lifeline during a tough time.
Okay, that makes sense. But it also makes me think about this whole states' rights conversation we were having. Like, if states start setting their own immigration policies, could we see some states being more welcoming to people fleeing situations like what's happening in Lebanon?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
could this push for state autonomy actually lead to a more compassionate approach in some parts of the U.S., even if the federal government's not leading the way?
It's kind of like a whole different angle on this whole thing. Okay, let's talk about the H2B visa program. What's going on there?
All right, so the H2B program lets U.S. employers hire workers from other countries for temporary jobs, specifically non-agricultural jobs.
Okay, got it.
And they just expanded it, adding a bunch more visas, something like 64,000 more.
Wow, that's a lot. What's driving that expansion?
Well, a big part of it is trying to deal with labor shortages in certain industries, things like hospitality, landscaping, construction, those kinds of jobs.
Right, those are the ones that often struggle to find enough workers, especially during those busy seasons.
Exactly. And the H2B program is meant to help fill that gap.
So this could have ripple effects on, the whole economy, right? Could it impact wages for both American workers and foreign workers? Could it even affect how much we pay for things? There's so much to think about here.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. These immigration policies, they might seem isolated, but they can have these huge economic and social consequences that end up affecting all of us in different ways. Like, if you live in a state that relies heavily on those industries we were just talking about, understanding the H2B program and what it could mean becomes super important.
It's a great reminder that we can't look at these updates in a vacuum. Got to understand how they connect to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
both nationally and on a personal level. This deep dive is really making me think about how interconnected everything is.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. Immigration policy, it's not just some abstract legal concept. It's about people's lives, the economy, the whole fabric of our society.
Okay, so we've talked about this shift towards states' rights, practical tips for anyone who might be directly affected by these changes, and even the potential impact on the economy and society as a whole. What else is jumping out at you from all this stuff you've been reading?
Well, what really strikes me is how these different pieces of news, from the TPS for Lebanon to this H2B visa expansion, they're all actually connected to these bigger global and economic forces that are happening right now.
I see what you mean. It's like zooming out and getting a wider view. We've got a humanitarian crisis in Lebanon forcing people to seek refuge elsewhere, and at the same time, we have these labor shortages here in the US. It's not just a coincidence, it's all part of these larger trends shaping the world around us.
Exactly. And it reminds us that immigration policy isn't just about managing numbers. It's about responding to what's happening in the real world, trying to find solutions that address both humanitarian needs and economic realities. But as we've been saying, those solutions might end up looking totally different depending on where you are in the U.S.
With states potentially calling more of the shots on immigration, it feels like we're heading into uncharted territory. What could the long-term consequences of this shift be? Could we actually see a future where some states are known as havens for immigrants, while others take a much stricter approach?
It's definitely a real possibility. And it raises a whole bunch of questions about how these different approaches could affect things like how well immigrants integrate into society and how communities function overall. Like, will we see more people self-segregating based on immigration status? Will it become harder or maybe easier for newcomers to feel welcome and build a life in certain states?
Whoa, it's fascinating to think about the potential social and cultural ripples that could come from all this. Could it even impact things like political representation and voting patterns down the line?
Absolutely. It adds a whole new level of complexity to an already incredibly complex issue. And like with any major societal shift, there will be winners and losers. Some people and communities will benefit from these changes, while others may face brand new challenges and a lot more uncertainty.
This whole conversation has been incredibly eye-opening. It's not just about understanding the legal side of immigration or what the policies are. It's about grappling with those human stories, the economic factors, and the potential long-term consequences for everyone.
Exactly. It's about connecting those dots, challenging those assumptions, and really engaging in a meaningful exploration of a topic that affects so many different aspects of our lives.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground today. This shift towards states' rights, practical tips for those who are directly impacted by all these changes, and even the potential impact on the economy and society as a whole. What else stands out to you from everything you've been reading?
You know, it's like we're seeing the very beginning of this future where people might choose where to live in the U.S., not just based on, jobs or the cost of living, but on how a state handles immigration.
Yeah,
Like it could become a major factor in people's decisions.
it really could. And that brings up a whole other set of questions too, right? Like how would all these different approaches affect things like how well immigrants integrate into society or, the overall feel of a community?
Exactly. Will we see more self-segregation, based on immigration status? Will it be harder or easier for newcomers to feel welcome and build a life, depending on which state they're in?
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about those potential social and cultural ripple effects. Like, could this even impact things down the road, like political representation or voting patterns?
Oh, absolutely. It just
Yeah.
adds another layer of complexity on top of what's already a really complicated issue. And like with any major societal change, there are going to be winners and losers. Some individuals and communities will benefit from these changes where others might face challenges they never saw coming.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. It's really driven home the point that immigration isn't just about laws and policies, it's about real people's lives. It's about economic realities and the potential long-term consequences for everyone.
It is. It's about understanding those human stories, recognizing those economic factors, and really grappling with those potential long-term consequences as this whole landscape continues to evolve.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about the constitutional implications of states taking a stand on immigration and the practical steps individuals can take to navigate this period of uncertainty.
And we went deeper than just the headlines, exploring specific situations, like the TPS designation for Lebanon and the expansion of the H2B visa program. Both of those really highlight the global and economic forces that are shaping this whole immigration debate.
I really hope our listener is feeling as energized by this conversation as I am. It's been so insightful, and I think it really underscores how important it is to stay informed and engaged.
Before we wrap up, though, there's one final thought I want to leave you with. This isn't the end of the story. With states taking on a more active role in shaping immigration policy, we're likely to see even more legal challenges, even more heated policy debates, and maybe even some unexpected alliances forming.
And as we move forward, it's crucial to remember that it's the individuals and families who are directly impacted by these changes that often bear the brunt of the uncertainty and the consequences. Their stories, their lived experiences, their voices, they need to be at the forefront of this conversation.
Absolutely. Staying informed and actively engaging is so vital. Whether it's through deep dives like this, participating in local advocacy groups, or even just having those open and honest conversations with people in your community who are affected by these policies. Every voice and every action truly makes a difference.
So as we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you with this question. What will you do with this knowledge? How will you use it to navigate this changing landscape and contribute to a more informed and compassionate dialogue around immigration?
Because at the end of the day, the future of immigration in the U.S. isn't just determined by laws and court rulings. It's shaped by the choices we make as individuals, the conversations we have, and the actions we take, both collectively and personally.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
It really makes you think, like what if we get to a point where people are actually choosing where to live in the U.S. based on a state's immigration policies? Like alongside job opportunities and cost of living, it's immigration policy that's the deciding factor.
It's wild to think about, but it could actually happen.
Oh, it could definitely happen.
Yeah.
And then like how do those different approaches play out in terms of integration and the overall vibe of a community?
Right, like will certain areas become more or less diverse because of it? Will it be harder or easier for newcomers to feel welcome and build a life depending on which state they choose?
It's fascinating to think about all those potential social and cultural ripple effects. And down the line, could it even affect things like political representation and voting patterns?
It's like a whole new layer of complexity on top of what's already a super complicated issue.
Exactly. And like with any big societal shift, there will be some who benefit and others who face new challenges. Some individuals and communities will definitely come out ahead, while others might encounter obstacles they never even imagined.
This entire conversation has been so eye-opening. It's really driven home the point that immigration isn't just about laws and policies. It's about real people's lives. It's about economic realities and the potential long-term consequences that ripple out and affect everyone.
It is. It's about connecting those dots, recognizing those human stories and those economic factors, and really grappling with those potential long-term consequences as this landscape keeps changing and evolving.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We started with the constitutional implications of states taking a stand on immigration, and then we moved on to those practical steps individuals can take to navigate this time of uncertainty.
And then we dug even deeper, exploring specific situations like what's happening in Lebanon with TPS and that expansion of the H2B visa program. Both of those really highlight those global and economic forces that are shaping the entire immigration debate.
It's been such an insightful conversation. I hope our listeners are feeling as engaged and energized by it as I am. It really highlights how crucial it is to stay informed and involved in this issue.
Before we wrap things up, though, I want to leave everyone with one final thought. We're not at the finish line yet. This story is still unfolding. As states continue to assert themselves and take a more active role in shaping immigration policy, we're going to see more legal challenges, more intense policy debates, and maybe even some unlikely alliances forming.
And as we move forward, we can't forget that it's often the individuals and families who are directly affected by these changes that are hit the hardest. They're the ones facing the most uncertainty and bearing the weight of those consequences. Their stories, their experiences, their voices need to be heard.
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why it's so crucial to stay informed and stay engaged. Whether that means listening to deep dives like this one, getting involved with local advocacy groups, or even just having those honest, open conversations with people in your community who are impacted by these policies, every voice, every action truly makes a difference.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, we want to leave you with this question. What will you do with this knowledge? How will you use what you've learned to navigate this changing landscape and contribute to more informed and compassionate conversation around immigration?
Because ultimately, the future of immigration in the U.S. isn't just about laws and court decisions. It's about us. It's about the choices we make, the conversations we have, and the actions we take both individually and as a society.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel US Migration News. We hope you are doing great. Well, in today's video, we will be talking about December 2024 immigration update, positive news. The 10th Amendment to the US Constitution is vital in preserving state autonomy by ensuring that any powers not explicitly granted to the federal government nor prohibitive to the states are reserved for the states or the people. This allows state significant authority to act independent, particularly in areas not explicitly covered by the federal law. Governors in a particular can take steps to protect their states, citizens including immigrants, regardless of their legal status, and many are preparing to safeguard their states from potential federal overreach, particularly in immigration policies that may harm vulnerable populations. The judicial system, especially the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, play a key role in blocking federal action that conflict with the state law or negatively impact residents. The court's ruling cannot protect state rights even in areas where federal law holds primary authority, such as immigration. This judicial protection provides an additional layer of defense for states seeking to protect their citizens, ensuring their safety and well-being, even when federal policies are at oddities with local priorities. Individuals facing uncertainty under changing immigration policies can take proactive steps to secure their status, such as extending employment authorization documents. EAD is available to individuals with a DACA, temporary protected status, asylum seekers, as those adjusting their status, allow legal work in the US filing for EAD extension before a new administration. Tax office ensures that individuals maintain work authorization without disruption. EADs are also harder to revoke once issued, providing greater job security and peace of mind. Advance Parole is another important measures allowing individuals to travel outside the US and return without risking their immigration status. This is especially important in times of policy shifts that may affect travel or re-entry rights. Advance parole ensures that individuals can maintain their status even if they need to leave the country, offering a safeguard against potential policy changes that could impact their ability to return. The green card renewal process has been simplified with the I-90 form now offering a 36-month extension instead of the previous 24-month extension. This change eliminates the need for many individuals to visit a file officer or a passport staff, making travel easier while awaiting a new green card. Lebanon's designation for TPS protect Lebanese nationals in the US, and the expansion of the H2B visa program offers additional opportunities for seasonal workers benefiting both immigrants and employers. These developments provide much needed support for immigrants navigating the US immigration system.